she called it a love letter to Chinatown. I think it's a love letter to the people of Chinatown, and she captured so many different stories. I know she interviewed other people too, and you couldn't cram all of them in there, but it's a beautiful love letter. Thank you. I'm going to actually just kind of quickly introduce, and again, I want to acknowledge that we are here, and I live and work, and I was born on the unceded traditional ancestral territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. All of us do. And one of the things to me about this film and about displaced communities, marginal communities, those that have had to fight for their existence all the time, is that we understand what it's like to be guests, to kind of feel always unwelcome, welcome sometimes, precarious, and in some ways, what it is to live here in Indigenous territories that as guests, even though I was born here and I'm fourth generation, I think that is an appropriate way also to open up our discussion, because we have a set of really special people, special to me, and I'll introduce each one and then ask them to talk about what they thought about the film, but also what we can learn and what they can tell us about how to think of other communities in Vancouver, especially. So Karen has given us this wonderful, almost a set of case studies of Chinatowns across North America. But we have Djaka Blais, who is the executive director of the Hogan's Alley Society. And you noticed, for those of you with eagle eyes, that one of the maps showed the proposed freeway, the downtown freeway, the third crossing freeway, it's many names, and that it actually did obliterate Hogan's Alley. And that the Georgia Viaduct, which was one of the sections of that freeway that did get built, that it was basically, displacing a historical community. And so we're so happy to have Djaka with us. Next to Djaka is Stephanie Leo, who helped create, along with Mike Tan and others, the Chinatown Celebration Society, which, again, is trying to make sure that intangible culture, you heard that phrase, tangible versus intangible culture, things like the lion dance, the dragon dance, the fire dragon dance, which you saw at the end there with the incense lighting and that. So our thanks to Stephanie for being one of the community leaders in doing that. Next to her is Kevin Huang of Hua Foundation. I've known Kevin a long time because a lot of our students benefit from being interns and working with Kevin. And Hua Foundation was originally created to really push back against this idea that Chinese were somehow barbaric for eating seafood that was sending them to extinction. And so sustainable seafood without demonizing and racializing and dismissing Chinese for somehow being barbaric, eating shark's fin, like how to actually engage and work with communities to bring them along, to understand what they're doing and why. And so thanks to Kevin. Kevin's also, the Hua is based in Chinatown, has been for a long time. So thanks to Kevin from here. Karen, you've been introduced to. And next to Karen is Nagra. Many of you may know is a wonderful artist who is also a board member of the Punjabi Market Collective. She is responsible for one of the murals up there right on 49th and Main, but she's also a wonderful recent project was the Komagata Maru signage down at Canada Place. But you'll see her work all over the place. And so again, Vancouver Canucks practice jerseys. I think it was, how many years ago was that? 2021, 3 years ago. So really happy to have Jag here again, and really the Punjabi market area. For those who don't know, 49th and Main. That's again a historic area. It may not date back, say, quite as long as Vancouver Chinatown, but it's been over 50 years there too, so an incredibly meaningful place. And so we're really happy that she's here to be able to talk a little bit about some of those things. So maybe I'll I'll kind of start by going back to the first and just ask, Djaka, this is the first time you've seen the film, right? Yeah, I've seen it about, I don't even know, like 10 times, and it still makes, it still makes me cry at the end. So there was a little. I'm glad that Janice was doing a little talking so I could recover. But Djaka, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I got to sit beside a celebrity to watch it, so that was wonderful. But what an amazing film, Karen. I just was so inspired by it and really felt energized and grounded in the work that we're trying to do. So I'm with Hogan's Alley Society. We're working to advance the well-being of people of African descent, Black people, and we're doing that through inclusive housing, built spaces, and culturally informed programming. And so Henry mentioned that Hogan's Alley was referenced in the film, and I think it's always it's been really interesting journey that we've been on as friends here on this panel in terms of building relationships among our different organizations because of the interconnectedness of the history of our communities. Hogan's Alley being right beside Chinatown, and the being a very multicultural community in itself. Hogan's Alley was also the nucleus of Vancouver's first Black community. And with the displacement, we lost that nucleus of that community. And since then, we haven't seen another nucleus of a Black community reappear in the city. And so, when you talked about the losing of those the intangible culture, we talk about the loss of the homes and the businesses that people had established in Hogan's Alley, but it's ultimately the loss of the political, cultural, and social capital that people had established. That's been the most impactful on the Black community since over the decades, right? And young people talking about these growing up with this significant sense of isolation, of feeling, anti-Black racism and feeling like they're going through that on their own, and a lack of a sense of community. So it really resonated to see like the importance of place, the importance of those connections that come through place in a really organic way, and that I just was really inspired by seeing the people on the screen and how they were organizing, and the importance of community organizing to protect those intangible pieces.
Thanks, Djaka. I'm actually going to give a heads up to Jack that I'm going to sort of give that same question to you next about what the film sort of did in terms of your thinking and again considering your own attachments to Punjabi market. But just to kind of gloss on what Djaka mentioned about full disclosure, I know all these people already, so I won't hide it and sort of objectively kind of treat them equally as unknown. We do have history, we have relationships, and I think the reference to making sure that we work together, and that it's not just each community fighting on its own. And I think that's one of the messages that's very strong in the film as well. So thanks, Djaka. Jack.
Yeah, thanks, Henry. This is the second time I've watched it. I don't know if it was last year or the year before. First time I saw it was at a screening at UBC. And the entire time, even today, like my mind was blown at how many similarities there are between Punjabi market and Chinatowns, right? The risk of erasure, gentrification, and lost history. Our Punjabi market in Vancouver was the very first Little India in all of North America. And it's only been around for 50 some years, but the amount of importance that neighborhood had for people like my parents. Like my mom still recalls how much like the price of meat and butter was back in like the 80s. This is very useful information she was sharing with me. But this place meant so much, and it was more than the shops. It was more than, you know, the physical features of it. It was community. It was a place where they found a sense of belonging in this new land that they had come to. And it was bustling in the 80s and 90s, and the last, like, you know, 2 decades, there's been a real decline. There's been a lot of businesses that have moved on to Surrey, and Surrey's like bustling now, right? It's like everyone knows there's brown people everywhere you look. And unfortunately, you know, what's happened in Punjabi market is it's so close from being completely erased, right? And so it was, you know, a group of passionate volunteers who came together to try to save this neighborhood and kind of put in a new sense of renewal into it. We're not trying to bring back what was there in the 80s and 90s. The needs are different, but how do we keep that from being lost? Because so much of our history already has been lost. Yeah.
Thanks, Jack. That sense of like it's got to change. It's not. We're not going to try to go back nostalgically. It kind of bugs me. It's like 50s diners. I'm 50, so I'm, you know, I've been around. When you said it's not that long. I've been around 50 years plus old, so that's a long time. I feel like I'm around a long time. But the sense of renewal, they can't be going back to the 50s diners. I wasn't alive during the 50s. You know, what am I doing when I'm going to have a milkshake at a 50s diner? So what is it that we need to do? And maybe that's actually, you know, the Chinatown Celebration Society and the kinds of things that you're trying to do with others. What is it to renew in your mind? Even though there's a tradition, a fire dragon tradition that goes back 2,000 years, according to, you know, someone, Danny Kwan. But yeah, what is it in your mind that you know, Jag's brought up this idea of what do you do with a place that has to change?
I was just thinking back to what Djaka had said and watching this video again and thinking back to the last panel that we had. And I remember afterwards, I had friends who were like, okay, I get why you were there because the movie's Big Fight in Little Chinatown, but why was Punjabi Market there? And I'm just like, did you not get it? Like, if we lose these communities, any one of us, we all go down. So it's so important to highlight that, you know, interconnected struggle, but that we're all looking to really restore and renew and find different ways of celebrating and continuing a lot of our traditions that are a threat of being lost. I mean, we can lose a building, but if you lose those connections that we have every day, I think about, like, you know, same thing. My grandma, you know, going into stores and being able to have those conversations and being a little kid and being able to look up at her and hear that banter, or have my grandfather walk down the street and wave at somebody he worked at, you know, at a barbecue meat shop with. You know, if we lose that, if we lose those memories and we don't pass it on, if we don't think about what we want for future generations, we will lose these communities, and we don't want that, because what city do we have if we don't have Hogan's Alley, if we don't have Chinatown, if we don't have the Punjabi market?
Kevin, we'll pick on you next. You know, we've brought up a lot of themes that were in the movie, as well as, you know, sort of the things that kind of bring us together. But yeah, what else should we think about in terms of, after watching this film, in terms of community solidarities and things like that?
Yeah, for me, I think it's, I'm sorry, really loud. Definitely the importance of, like, growing up in Vancouver, you know, growing up quite white, realizing how much racialized communities has contributed to the city that I know, and how much, as we think about city planning, the growth of Metro Vancouver, like how much we're just letting go, and at the cost of, like, these high level agendas. Yes, housing is very important. Like, everybody should have right to housing, but it's also, how do we balance that with the history and systemic racism that's built in to these structures? What are we losing when we're thinking about gentrification in very culturally sensitive, and Chinatown is still a living neighborhood. And nothing really more upsets me in this Chinatown conversation than saying that it's a dying neighborhood, you should just let it go. It's so offensive. And, like, thinking about, just like in the film, there's, like, so many Chinatowns that are still working class. What are we doing for the working class? Especially racialized working class folks. And I think these are all themes that I really think that as we think about culture, race, it's all connected. And that might be like a very high level left wing thing to say, but like it is connected in a way that we need to address it for our city to be healthier and really be inclusive of everybody. And when we're thinking about, again, city building, we really aren't questioning city building for who when we're wedging ourselves against each other, right? So I think like starting a conversation, like again, going back to like thinking why I'm involved in this work, really trying to build new relationships with other racialized communities and other across class as well. I think we really need to do better in terms of that in Vancouver, just because like I think like talking to my American allies and stuff, like the Vancouver and Canada conversation, especially around class, is just not that nuanced yet. And I feel that that needs to be a part of the conversation. And I think the film really showed that through the working narratives that Karen was able to show.
Thanks, Karen. I think, given what everyone else has been saying, why did you make this film, but also what messages did you want people to take out of it? Because one of the things that I think is so beautiful about the film you've made and gifted us is that you're not saying it, you're not saying it like with a hammer banging over someone's head. You're allowing these stories of people, you're giving these voices as the story that you want to tell. And so, but now you're here, and what if you had the hammer would you want people to make sure that you saw in that film? And I know that some of the themes that have already been brought up were some of the things you were thinking about. It's one of the reasons why you didn't just pick one Chinatown, that you insisted on quadrupling your work or quintupling your work by having all these. So what are some of the things that you'd want us as an audience to kind of to amplify and maybe again in connection to what others have already said?
Well, I mean, I think like this discussion that we're having, like having a cross-community discussion around Chinatown, because to me, one thing that was important in the film is that it's not just a Chinatown story, and it's not just a Chinese neighborhood. Like this is a neighborhood that's very rooted in the history of Vancouver and the history of all the different cities that we went to. And even in just making the film, like the opening line with Jan Lee is like a very New York moment, right? And that's happening in New York's Chinatown. But like from the soundtrack, like the first song that plays in New York is actually a doo-wop group called the Cathays, and they were from New York's Chinatown. I mean, that song is very famous, like Tony Bennett sings that song. But and in Montreal, Chinatown, I put a Quebecois song. So like this idea that the history of these neighborhoods is very rooted in the history of our cities, the history of the settlement of our cities, and we should start seeing these neighborhoods as part of who we are as Vancouverites or Montrealers, not just as Chinese Canadians or whatnot. So that was one part that I felt really important. Like it's the story of our neighborhoods, right? Chinatown doesn't exist in China. It's like a thing of the diaspora, and is a thing here in North America. And it's also a stand-in for other communities who have faced this kind of erasure, like that Hogan's Alley, the map there. I learned when I did all this kind of research on the freeways, like the freeways went through basically every Chinatown, but the freeway itself was every Black community across North America, right? And like that's important to draw those links. And what Kevin is saying on the kind of class discussion, that is a more nuanced thing and a newer thing that needs to come out around Chinatown, because it's like, who does get to have a future in the neighborhood, right? And some people, it's like if we're gentrifying the place or cleaning up the place to have a bunch of bubble tea shops for like rich people to eat fancy fusion food, is that really Chinatown? Right. And so, and this idea of like museumification of the neighborhoods, right? Like it's a living community. So how do the choices that we make work for the quality of life of the residents? And then people like William, people that have community facing businesses, were really important to kind of show that. So all those kind of themes, I think, intersect in Chinatown.
Thanks. I'm going to throw a bit back out to others just to kind of maybe think and respond. And thanks. When we were talking, I remember way back when you were, starting to film, and we had this long conversation, and we were talking about that. Is like every every Chinatown is always next to the black community in every city. You know, Seattle, the International District is, but not just the black community, but the Japanese community, the Filipino community, on and on and on, because the kind of marginalization of non-white racialized communities has generally been a part of the geographic segregation of North American cities right from the beginning of the urban development. So I'm glad that you've really raised that, and in some sense, that's something that's important to think about too. I think of Yucho Chow. There was a wonderful photography exhibit, and Yucho Chow was a Chinatown photographer, and yet if you looked at the photographs he took shots of Punjabi people, he took shots of indigenous people, he took shots of black people. It's because that's who lived there. And they all lived, and it wasn't like there was the Chinese building and then next to it was the East Indian building. It was people were living cheek to jowl, eating things. So I want to throw that out in some sense about that this renewal moment we're in. There's some people who I think somehow that you have to figure out which Chinatown's for Chinese, or it's only for the Chinese. What would you say to the kind of idea that Chinatown should be, what's the word? It's primarily a place for the Chinese. I'll throw that out. Anyone want a popcorn style? Yes. I want to take that one on.
You're all looking at me. I think to the last year or two where we saw even politically within the city, there's a huge emphasis on Chinatown and, revitalizing Chinatown, but making it cleaner. And, a business leader in the community came up with this disgusting term talking about the walking dead and talking about those who live in the downtown east side. And I just think that kind of revitalization is not the Chinatown that I envision for myself or for my family. And I think we need to think really hard about, again, these class issues that Chinatowns are facing. And when we are thinking about revitalization, who is it for? Because we have that living community within Chinatown, do they benefit? Do things like art projects, like the Fire Dragon Festival, does that have any benefit to the community, or does it just continue to highlight this like savior narrative within the creative class, which we don't want? So I think it's really important that we think about what revitalization looks like, who's leading that revitalization, and is it just for the businesses? Because that's just one part of the community. It's important, but it's just one part, and we're going to leave a lot of people behind if we're only focusing on those legacy businesses.
I think when Karen was talking, it really made me think about the intentionality that went into the displacement of communities over the years, the building, urban renewal and building all these highways, and it was very intentional in initially segregating folks into those neighborhoods. And so moving forward, we also need to be very intentional in what we're planning in terms of future and present of these communities and how we're engaging different parts of the community in that planning, and making sure that we're not perpetrating the same narratives that were used in the past that were exclusionary, and that we're creating a space that, what I found inspiring is that sense of belonging within a Chinatown for different communities. Like ultimately, it being a place that people could land, could find their footing, could get set up, could then explore other opportunities, and that it wasn't just for one community, but for many. And so, how are we continuing that sense of a place for people to land and to be supported and to be connected to community in what we're continuing to build?
Thanks. Any other? Yeah.
I think this is the tough part about like what we're trying to do right now is just like the political forces right now are really just thinking about how do we seem like we're being really racially equitable by like specifically funding certain, big C like Chinese or, big B black, right? But it's like we're not really actually going into the structural issues around how we can actually support these communities and actually think about justice, right? And civic memory and civic history. Like we're I think it's very easy for, I think, politicians to come in to be like, it was just Lunar New Year, you know, every year is the same. I have this thing where I collect, like, you know, the worst red pockets there are from politicians just to see, you know, how culturally they are, appropriate they are. They're terrible, right? But anyway, that's a side note. But it's just like a shortcut for accessing and saying that, like, you know, they care about racialized communities. But I think, like, where we as community members, and I would classify ourselves as organizers, would be like, how do we actually step beyond that? And really think about, like, hey, look, instead of just funding us, there's also other communities going under the same type of challenges. What can we do? Can you support that networking? Can you support that solidarity work? And I think most people would say yes on the, you know, to you, but like they're probably a little afraid, because what does it mean for us to actually have collective power? So I think it's a tough balance right now for us, but it's something that I think this group here is really wanting to take on, just because we see it beyond Chinatown.
Djaka, what kinds of visions do you have for the future of Punjabi market in the light of these kinds of discussions too?
Yeah, I think trying to see beyond just Punjabi folks, right? Because the makeup wasn't always all Punjabis there, right? But how do we try to attract, you know, young entrepreneurs? How do we try to create a destination place where right now, like if someone lives in Abbotsford, the conversation is always, oh, I'll go to Surrey because there's more variety there. There's more for me there. And that's why the local businesses are struggling. How do we create a place where we're not competing with Surrey, because we can't? We're 3 city blocks, right? It doesn't make sense to try to compete with Surrey, but how do we provide a different kind of experience for people and try to keep that alive? And Kevin, what you were saying about like politicians and stuff, like, you know, election season, the number of you know, politicians that come by, talk to these legacy businesses, and of course these people who've been around running shops for 40, 50 years, they get very jaded very quickly because, hey, there was someone who came by, you know, 9 months ago and promised me something. And so when our collective came together, a lot of them didn't believe we could do anything, because they were like, yeah, we've seen it all before, we've heard it all before. And so trying to create positive, meaningful change, and not just empty promises, because it becomes this token neighborhood to try to get, you know, your votes in from. And that's not what we're after. We're trying to do more than that, right? And for me personally, like, if you had met me 5 years ago, I would have never sat here, because I would have been too shy. I wouldn't have, you know, I didn't know any history. I grew up in Maple Ridge, very, very whitewashed, had no relation to my culture outside of my family. And so it was because of Punjabi Market and getting connected in 2019, first time I had Punjabi friends in my life. First time I started feeling proud of my full first name, Jagandeep, and not being shy to tell people that. My brown skin, or the arts that are surrounding us that I just never appreciated before. So it's more than just protecting it for our elders, but like me finding myself at the age of like mid-30s. And now my kids, my wife and I have a 5 and 3-year-old. Like Akash today, all day was like, "Can I come to Punjabi Market today?" And I'm like, I'm not going there." Like being able to give that to them is really amazing.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah.
I know that you've got a kind of similar, maybe art. You know, you alluded to it a little bit, you know, and so as Jag was speaking, I was going, man, I think some of this must be resonating with Karen. Like, where is that in your own journey too? I mean, where's this film sit? I know that you've made films before, but yeah, I think a lot of people here would really appreciate knowing a little bit more about you in relation to the film in this similar way, and what Chinatown means to you.
Yeah, I mean, like similar to you, I think, you know, Chinatown is this place of belonging, right? Like I'm mixed race, so I kind of grew up believing that the white side of my family was the most Canadian side. And then I, you know, did this film on the head tax and actually realized like my deepest Canadian roots are on my Chinese side. and in this kind of era that we've come out of or are coming out of with COVID, you know, where everybody who looked like my father in my community and in my family was told to go back to their country, right? And like we're 5 generations deep in Canada, and to me, like places like Chinatown are a testament to the fact that we have been around for a long time. So, you know, it's having these places that kind of root you in place. And, you know, also like speaking about your children, like Chinatown is a place, like I'm trying to give my son that experience that I had with my grandmother and bringing him to Chinatown all the time. And he's a really picky eater. So I tell him, like, if you don't eat your bok choy, if you don't eat your broccoli, like they're not going to let you into Chinatown. Like I'll tell him those kind of things, like just to get him. But he loves it. And there's something about the place that he just feels at home there. And he goes around telling everyone he's half Chinese and he's only like a quarter. But I'm just like, I'll let it slide, you know, because he's so proud of his Chinese roots. Yeah. And my father, who spent basically his entire life like running away from his Chineseness. Now, you know, my son on picture day, I let him he has to wear a nice shirt, and he chose this kind of Chinese style shirt that I bought him in San Francisco's Chinatown, and he wanted to wear that on picture day, and I let him. And then my dad gets this picture and he's like, whoa, like Dawson really, you know, that's my son's name, he really you know, identifies with his Chinese side. And it's because he has that place called Chinatown that is a place where when you go there, it's like you belong.
I'm really struck by this touchstone, a place, the importance of place. And like it's not just language lessons or you know, a book or something. It's got to be some, you know, rooted in a place in space, and that really has come across in the film. It's come across in a lot of the comments. Really struck by that all of you were talking about, including places that maybe aren't there anymore but can be revived. And I think that's the other thing when people talk about death. You know, it's not like a human dying. You know, that a spirit of a place can actually be revived. That there, you know, it's not the buildings. It's what's going on. So really appreciate that. We want to give a chance for the audience to also ask you some questions. But any other last words maybe that you want to get in, Kevin, Stephanie? No? Questions? Okay, let's throw it open to the audience. If you want to hashtag today in any way, I think it's KDocs Film Festival. I guess it must be for those who remember. But questions for any of our panelists or the filmmaker? We've got a microphone here that can be brought to you.
Oh gosh, that's loud. That was a really wonderful film. I think it was really nice to kind of understand that sentiment of like having place and like, you know, like seeing how it can bring like someone close to their identity. And like for me growing up, like my parents had very similar sentiments to like, what was the person's name that was in the seniors home? Like talking about
Mike Tan.
Mike, right? And also like William, right? They both kind of had like that idea of like making it out of Chinatown was like kind of a good thing, right? And like my parents kind of raised me with that whole mindset too, to some degree, but like not necessarily the same way, because yeah, like, but anyways, like that got me really thinking about how like throughout the film you're just like, while you're interviewing the people and seeing like how these people have these deep connections with the city, like did you find that there was also a lot of apathy towards like the gentrification of Chinatown or like the things being taken away? Because like sometimes I do feel like some of my, or like a lot of people that I knew or like some of the businesses that I've known in Chinatown have like been okay with the fact that they're like, okay, I have to sell the spot. Like I'm gonna move to Richmond or other locations like that. And yeah, I was just curious to see like if there was a lot of apathy and how that made you feel, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting question. Like, it's hard. Like, existing in Chinatown is not easy, right? Especially when it's a neighborhood, you know, that's going through all this kind of disinvestment and erasure and all of these things. But, you know, people work hard their whole lives. Like, they are entitled to retire and they are entitled to sell their business or do whatever. So, Yeah, no, of course, there is that feeling and that sentiment, but it's really like Henry in the film when you talk about like these places that are more meaningful because they have a memory attached to them, right? And when you start talking about the stories behind the places and the meaning behind that, people take a new look. Like Chinatown is always something I think a lot of us just took for granted. Like growing up, it would always be there, and this place is going to be here forever until it's closed, right? And I think it's also making room for like the young entrepreneurs, things that you're talking about. Like people, Chinatown to me is not just Chinese. It's like a set of values, like Chinatown values, like what you're talking about, giving people a foothold, a place to come in, to start up, to have a family business, to have these kind of values around culture and belonging and all of that. Like those kind of businesses and those values can continue, even though maybe the old business retired or moved to Surrey or wherever, Richmond, wherever it might be. So there is that apathy, but I think talking about the Chinatown story in a different way also pulls that meaning back, right? Like Jessica Chen in the film talks about like bringing people back and community back, sewing all this ruptured urban fabric back together. And part of that is having these kind of conversations, giving meaning to these places that really, without the people inside, are just buildings. It's just a collection of buildings. It's the people that make it special and make it meaningful.
I'm wondering if for the places that are gone, Hogan's Alley in some sense is, it's come back a little, and there's a business, there's a shrine to Jimi Hendrix's grandmother, but that placemaking. I mean, I think especially for maybe Jag and Djaka. I mean, what do you see as the tools that for your places, and what should politicians actually do rather than giving you weird ass red envelopes, whatever, and there's some equivalent for the Punjabi community. There's some equivalent, I'm sure, for if they want to come and get the pictures with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can't underestimate the importance of space for people. In Black communities, So first of all, there are Black people in Vancouver. There's lots of people in BC, and there's lots happening. And a constant challenge is space for the art that they want to, the programming, for youth, for seniors, space for businesses. And I think often in conversations I've been in with Black community members, there's actually a sense of envy towards Chinatowns, and that actually exists in many municipalities, that you can go to a place and you can find, people of your community. You can find your foods, you can find your, products, and that you go into that space and it can be a refuge from the micro or macro aggressions that you're facing in other parts of the city. So what can politicians do? Like, there's, municipalities have access to space, to land. They're always trying to figure out what to do with it. There's communities that are hungry to be able to do amazing things with it, and giving the opportunity to those communities to really, find ways to develop it so that it's not just being developed for the highest bidder, but for what is best for our community.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, we've been constantly meeting with the city of Vancouver for as long as I've been around, for 4 years, and we have regular conversations and meetings. I feel like during the pandemic at one point, we had this Zoom meeting, and I was like, it can't always be us coming to the city with ideas. That doesn't become a two-way relationship. All you're doing is approving it or denying it. What are you doing for us, right? So kind of putting the pressure on them that way. And, it's a shame that all these neighborhoods, there isn't kind of automatically a historical designation given. The fact that Hogan's Alley was allowed to be lost, that's devastating, right? Jazz Lalli is one of our board members here from Punjabi Market Collective. And after the film, we were like, is this the next step we need to do and try to get protections on these 3 blocks. So yeah, it's hard, but yeah.
Just so you know, the freeway fight turned into the first 2 historical areas in all Vancouver in its history. HA1, and HA1A. That was the first. Like that Chinatown fight over the freeway created those areas that include Strathcona as well. And then also Gastown became, a second one. But it's all then it's like, okay, let's stop because so it's a very interesting question. Now in Montreal, that was, Karen, you were one of those people, one of the working group, and what does that designation mean there? One of the interesting things in Vancouver Chinatown, we are actually kind of complacent because of that designation that took place in the 1970s. We can take for granted that it won't disappear, you could say, but other Chinatowns, I think, Karen, your film really shows, they don't have that same one. But in Montreal, someone was asking me, I said, did they win? Halfway through the film, I was like, did they get it? And I was going to go, just wait, just watch the film. So, but what does it mean?
Yeah, to answer your question, in a way, it means everything, and on another level, it means nothing. For us in Montreal, we're Vancouver Chinatown is the same, but we're one of the very few Chinatowns that we are still in our original geographic spot. Like Calgary's Chinatown's been moved twice, everybody gets displaced. So we use it as a strategy, actually, and the strategy was to bring down the kind of rampant real estate speculation that was happening in our Chinatown. So as a tool, it was very useful for that. But just as much as heritage protection can save your Chinatown, it can also mothball your Chinatown, making it impossible for the people that own the heritage buildings to actually renovate those buildings. People get afraid, they don't invest in the neighborhood. So you have to be very careful, and it's this kind of fine-edged sword of balancing both of those things. But it's also it's really funny because at the time, Stephen Guilbeault is, he's the environment minister now, but at the time he was the heritage minister, and his riding is our Chinatown. So all the time during this whole fight, his office, I'll give them credit, they cared, but they're calling all the time, what can we do? How can we help? What can we do? We're the heritage, minister. What can they do? They can give us a plaque. That's what which is not that useful when when your community is getting erased. They literally only had money to give us a plaque or to make a museum for the community that used to be there, right? So we can house all our artifacts of our lost community into this museum. So to me, the heritage thing is also about fighting for policy and what can politicians do? It's what can you do for living heritage communities? And why do we have to contort ourselves in all these weird grant applications to be relevant to whatever program you have, when how about you make yourself relevant to our living heritage community that's right here and needs your help right now?
Okay, thank you. Some other questions from the audience? Yes.
Yeah, I just had a really quick one, I think. Anyways, thank you very much for such a wonderful movie, and it really brought back some really sharp memories for me. So I did grow up here in Vancouver, born and raised in Vancouver, and I don't live here anymore. I live in the Okanagan now, but for various reasons other than the price of housing is nuts here. Anyways, but I just want to say, you had that question earlier about just the different people and how they get along, and I just want to emphasize that I remember attending a lot of the New Year's Day parades, right, and some of the recent ones. It wasn't just Chinese people, and I find that that parade is one of the most inclusive events, it seems, that I found as an audience member, right? I remember seeing it was the Japanese drummers at the end of that parade, or near the end, and then we also had some First Nations there, and this was probably in 2010 or something, I can't remember, but it was incredible, and to have that, I don't know if there's any other cultural parades in Vancouver that do that, but that one does, and it really, to me, and it happens in Chinatown. It doesn't happen in the West End. It doesn't happen in Richmond like that, right? It happens in Chinatown, our Chinatown. So just want to say that we should really look at continuing that, because it's an event, but it's an event that it celebrates everyone, and Chinatown celebrates everyone. That's my opinion, anyways. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah. You want to take this on? No. You want to
I agree. I love that parade, and I look forward to it. And I remember participating in it as a kid when I did Kung Fu. And this year was the 50th anniversary of that parade, but it was a tough year because actually it was the first year that a queer group that was denied access to be able to participate in the parade, as well as Chinatown Together, who very recently fought against and really brought the community together against the development of 105 Kiefer. So it was a really interesting time where you have your community elders and these established benevolent associations telling you cannot be a part of this parade, and not giving us any good reason for why they can't. And so, you're only left to assume what those reasons might be. And I think those are the kind of conversations we need to have. And it's funny, I was reading all the poisonous sort of comments on the Vancouver Sun when they were reporting on this whole story. And it goes back to that apathy. I think there's a lot of people who just don't care. And it's well, you get a parade. And there's lots of communities already represented, lots of different groups. So, why does this queer group need to be a part of it? Why does this political rabble-rouser need to be a part of the Lunar New Year parade? It's just going to be disruptive. Why can't you just honor your seniors and toe the line and, perform Kung Fu or do your dance and be a part of your culture in that way and not cause a stir, as we're always told. But I think recently there have been groups that have capitalized on that apathy and have used it to their advantage to silence a lot of the youth from coming together and wanting to see change and wanting to see themselves and their values reflected in what this neighborhood could be.
Thanks, Stephanie. And for those who don't know what that was, Melody Ma, who was here early this morning, or not this morning, this evening. Yeah, Melody's out there, and Melody is Chinatown Together, one of the organizers. And so, yeah, ask her, hey, what was that all about? I now just kind of, it's really powerful in this film. And maybe before we go to the next question, in a certain sense, I mean, Chinatown is a set of values. We talk about intangible culture, tangible culture. I loved how you described the process in San Francisco where they said, ooh, they're going to erase this. So let's create some distinctive architecture that's sort of this kitschy, Chinesey. And, Los Angeles, Chinatown, same thing. It's 3 separate moves. The Union Station, Railroad Station wiped it out, so they moved. And they actually hired Hollywood set designers to design a Los Angeles Chinatown that would be very distinctive, and and so this idea of Chinatown, who's it for? It's too easy to fall into it's for the Chinese or it's for the non-Chinese. It's also in some sense, what are the set of values that actually give the place meaning, and that kind of inclusion. I think we've heard the sense of belonging, a sense of history passed down within families. You've all mentioned that kind of intergenerational, and it really is tragic that different generations, and there have been multiple times in Chinatown's history in Vancouver as well as others, where there's weaponizing between generations, and there's nothing more tragic than eating your young. In a certain sense, from a historical point of view. And that's also part of, you could say, Chinatown's history and community histories, where a certain vision that's coming, and it's a future, one of our elders, Fred Ma, who was in this film, was interviewed by, I think it was in the Sun article, and he said, you gotta let the young people in, because they're the future of Chinatown. And so there really is a counterproductive, almost insane, I would say, if you're, we're all trending, towards being seniors, but the young people are the future of these places too. It has to have meaning for them, and I think all of you have actually talked about that. I saw another question. Someone, a hand. Oh, there it is. Yeah.
Couple of comments, I guess, and a question in a way too. But I cannot express how profoundly these various cultures have impacted my life, my exposure to Chinese, Asian cultures, Filipino, Black. It's part of what I am. The artifacts of this are in my home. Sometimes I take it too much for granted, but there's this notion, I'm reminded of this notion by the biologist Edward O. Wilson. He talked about biophilia. It was this notion that people are naturally attracted to green space and nature, but if they're isolated from that, they lose that. It's like a muscle that begins to atrophy. And I think the same principle also applies to culture. You know, if we're exposed to culture, we'll naturally gravitate to that, and we will imbibe it. It'll become part of us. The diversity of culture, as in the diversity of nature, and the notion of physical place and real experiences where we get to interact with culture. And Chinatown is such a huge place in Vancouver, and we've been there many times. You know, it's so much a part of what I am, even though, you know, I'm certainly not, obviously not Asian, but it's just being in Vancouver. This is so much a part of what Vancouver is. Again, not Asian, South Asian, Filipino, Black, but the notion of physical space, I think, is really important, and I just want to emphasize that point. If you have any comments or thoughts around that.
Thank you. I thought I saw someone else. Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, I just had a really specific question. What was the song that the girl who put the record on at the end and everyone was dancing? What was that? I really want to have it.
Yeah, I have to go back in that obviously we have the song because it's in the film. I forget the name of it, but I will find it and I will put it on Instagram or something. Like I'll figure it out. But sorry, for the life of me, I don't remember. That's okay. It's a pretty awesome song. Yeah.
It'll be hashtag what's it, KDocs FF. We'll throw the song throwing up on an Instagram or
Shazam or something.
Shazam, yeah. Great.
Hello, my name is Chris. I just want to say thank you for the film. I'm half Chinese and half white, but I'm very white, and I've learned very well to speak the master's speech in the master's house. So just the questions I have is, I've been to Chinatown many times. The benevolent associations and the clan associations, I've always wondered, are those places that are closed off from the wider community? Are they considered sacred spaces? I'm a bit curious about what what was the word you used? The intangibles? What is this intangible culture? Like, we all know what a 10-story building looks like, but what is this intangible culture? Why does it need protecting? And I think Kevin also brought up the point about, like, is it only the legacy businesses that should have a voice of representation? If they're overrepresented, who or what members of the community are not being represented in that story? So that would maybe be the second question. And I forgot the third one, so.
No, those are good. Two good questions. I'll throw it out. Yeah.
I'll take that. I think it was Stephanie that brought it up, but around the legacy businesses, around the society spaces, and I just kind of want to riff off the gentleman up there's comment. I didn't grow up here, first generation Taiwanese immigrant. Most people are like, well, what are you doing in Chinatown, right? But I think it's like actually important because the more I learn and do this community work, you know, Henry, Djaka, Jag, you know, learning about the work that you're doing to try and teach us settlers like this history and all the things that, again, what I shared earlier around what we know of Vancouver is built off of this. Why are we letting it go so easily? So I do think it's a responsibility, the more we know, that we need to also participate in, you know, our actions in contributing to these neighborhoods. And even though I don't go to Punjabi market, I'm sorry, I really just drive by most of the time, you know, but it's just like, it's not for me, but it's also important that I find ways to support that neighborhood, right? Even though I don't benefit from it day to day. And I think the society buildings for me, yeah, it's like sacred spaces for sure. The concept of intangible cultural heritage is a shift away from only protecting the physical. So the languages, after being in Chinatown for 10 plus years, my Cantonese is still very bad. My partner doesn't like that, but anyway, that's a separate issue. I'm still trying to, you know, retain my heritage language, which is Taiwanese. And I think that, you know, the society buildings were formed and clans were formed in a way to service their members and their family members from exclusion, like, you know, sending money back home, banking, you know, when people first immigrated here, housing, jobs. So I think it's just like a form of people organizing themselves for mutual aid. And now moving forward, I think that, personally, I think like that needs to be preserved as a way to tell the history of people that came before us. And even though, again, it's not for me, I want to find ways to support it. But I think what Henry and others were mentioning is there's a lot of intergenerational struggle around once, you know, you have power, how do you utilize it, especially give it to the next generation to try and perhaps fail and learn. And I think that has been a really strong struggle in at least Vancouver's Chinatown. And it's something that, you know, we as a group are trying to figure out is also broadening not just within Chinatown, but other networks. How do we really learn from other experiences of working with, you know, intergenerationally, thinking about cultural entrepreneurship? What does that mean? So for me, I think like in response to your question, like, yeah, these are special spaces and they like multi-generation. Like I have friends who are like 7th generation Chinese Canadian and they come to like our programming, you know, trying to figure out cultural, you know, heritage and like language. And I think that's where there's a lot of potential for rejuvenation and building of space, like space-linked memories for the next generation.
Yeah, I can actually. I was just thinking the last few minutes when it comes to the physical structures that are there. Like in Punjabi market, there's nothing distinctive about these buildings. A lot of them look quite run down, right? Like if you were to go there, you'd kind of be like, "This is it." But when we talk about intangible heritage, if you were to go back to Main and 51st, there used to be Frontier Cloth House. You know, it was a legacy business. It was like an anchor business. That's where people did their bridal shopping. What was important, what was happening behind those doors. That building was, you know, the owners moved out of there. It was left kind of abandoned, super rundown, graffiti all over it until last year when it came down. So now we wait and see what comes there next. Right? How is the ground floor, if it's a 6-story building with residential on the top 5 floors, how is that ground floor going to affect what is happening on the streets in Punjabi market? There's a development, I don't know when it's going to start, soon kind of, probably at Main and 49th. That lot used to be a Esso gas station. Again, that ground level is going to dictate what happens to the mom and pop shops. And we had sat down with the developer, similar to what you were saying at the beginning, Karen. You know, developers erasing what the history is. The same thing happened. Like we saw the application, and we were like, "There's no mention of Punjabi market." And you know, the mock-ups they had all white people walking down the street. And we sat down with the developer in Punjabi market, and we tried to educate him on the importance of this. So, you know, it's a lot of having to teach people how are your next steps going to affect what needs to be preserved here, right? Yeah. I feel like in many ways, groups like ours, people like us in the broader community, it's like, oh, they're a nuisance. They're, you know, they keep asking for stuff. Why are they fighting again? Didn't we already give them, you know, we gave them $20,000 already. Well, what next? it's we're kind of not seen as equals a lot of the times with those in power, or yeah. So it's. Yeah, I will continue to be a nuisance to those developers. I'll continue, right? Yeah, yeah.
That's a great way, I think, to end. Thank you, Jack, for bringing it to close. Any other things on intangible culture that people want to add? Maybe you can. Yeah. Oh, there is one. Okay, one last question then. Right.
Hi.
Yeah.
Okay, great. There's been a few comments during the panel about growing up and feeling like whitewashed or being whitewashed. And I was wondering if any of you had any advice on people trying to reconnect with their culture.
Actually, it's the biggest, in some sense, the challenge of not having space. I think you really pointed it out. So what are the things that we need to do to make it, possible to reconnect? I mean, all of you have talked about it.
Yeah.
On space. What are you going to do? What do you do in those spaces?
I think the interesting part of all these stories is that despite the purposeful attempts at erasing and displacing and oppressing people, people found ways to connect and to find ways to organize, those activities so that people could stay connected to their culture. I have 2 young boys, they're 10 and 12, and moving here, one of our priorities was trying to find those different activities that they could see other Black people, other Black kids, Black adults, as role models for them, activities that were, different cultural and my partner's Ethiopian, so connecting with the Ethiopian community, but that it doesn't always need to be just that aspect. Is just even seeing people that look a little bit more like them, and having those opportunities. And so what I had to go through that experience growing up, and I'm still going through it as well. And it just feels like this, constant journey of trying to connect with that part of me. And I think that's what drew me to wanting to organize and work and support Black community work. But I think there's so many different ways now, and there's a lot more than when I was a kid, I think. So just trying to seek out those opportunities is really important.
Thanks, John. I think that's actually the best definition of intangible culture. You can look up, Google intangible culture and UNESCO, and you'll get a long paragraph with lots of 5-syllable words and things like that. And it'll be about culture, the things that are. But in some sense, and maybe I'll, as someone who researches cultural heritage and UNESCO policies and how do we conserve, and I notice I use the word conserve and not preserve. Right? Conservation. Just to introduce that as the last thing for you all to think about, is that preservation is like putting it in a jar, sealing it so it doesn't rot, right? It's the museum glass case. It's we're frozen this in time, versus a lot of what we've been talking about is get involved, right? Get active. You don't know anything, you'll learn. You'll learn lots of stuff by doing, and the learning by doing and getting involved is how you make community, is how you make alliances, is how you make friendships, it's how you learn. And how you know also that you're going to disagree, right? And some of you can speak, I spoke Cantonese when I was young, and now I can speak like a 10-year-old with my grandmother, right? That's okay. That's my version of, and I can try to learn more Cantonese and go. And so we're all on journeys, and those journeys and the kind of intangible culture are those things and those acts and those practices and those journeys that make you who you are. And so whitewashing is not a thing. It's the things that you've done. And if you keep doing those things, then you'll continue to make yourself into that. Whereas if you get involved, find a place of meaning, a touchstone, a place with gravity, and try to figure out your relationship to it and the other people there. Don't read it in a book alone. Go meet people, talk to them, listen to what their journeys are. Find out where you are in relation to others. That's what community is, and that ultimately is what intangible culture is. It's not something that was passed down 2,000 years ago and kept the same all the way through, because each generation remade it and adapted it and made it theirs, because that's who they became. So culture is the result, not the thing you get, if that makes sense. So thank you all. Thank you all for coming.